الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا صلوا على محمد وآل محمد We have been discussing some of the factors that are relevant to better understanding and better practicing moderation and balance and a comprehensive understanding of Islam, which is in line with our intellect and our mind, but also in line with our heart, with our soul, with our emotions, with our fitrah, with all of the human needs that we have and which our Creator is aware of and knows better than any of us may ever be able to appreciate or imagine. The profound fulfillment of all of those needs, the desire to grow, to learn, to flourish, to achieve success and salvation and eternal life, all of those desires that we have, some of them spoken, some of them unspoken, and all of the vulnerabilities that we have, all of them, they have their answer within a religion and a message that is going to be given by the Creator of heaven and earth, the Creator and the Sustainer of humanity, who knows us in a comprehensive way better than any of us may even know our own selves. Among the factors that we have discussed is the need to admit and recognize that there is a purpose in every circumstance that we face within our life. We cannot imagine that anything happens by accident. There is no coincidence, there is no circumstance that takes place because Allah was unaware, His attention was diverted, He was thinking about something else and He wasn't paying attention to our affairs, or He didn't know what was going to happen. And therefore, our only responsibility and our only fear is that perhaps we might not be fulfilling our end of the bargain sufficiently. But beyond that, we shouldn't ever wonder whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fulfilling His end of the bargain. He has made a promise and He will always fulfill it. That knowledge and that confidence is an essential part of the worldview and the life of a believer, to the extent that it has been emphasized in our ahadith and in the teachings of our religion. that you should never say anything bad about a time, a place, a day, a month. Never say that anything is unlucky. In fact, this was one of the emphatic teachings of the Prophet and also of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. There is a hadith of Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. لا تسبوا الدهر فإن الدهر هو الله. Don't ever curse a certain day, a certain month. Don't ever say that Mondays are always unlucky for me. Don't ever say that this period in my life is an unfortunate or an unlucky period in my life. It might be a period of mourning. Even the Prophet had Amul Huzn, which was a period of grief and a period of mourning. But that was when the Prophet was also given many glad tidings by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and according to some narrations, when Allah sent His Prophet for that celestial journey which we know of as Mi'raj. So it was not just a time of trial, it was also a time of strength for the Prophet. Amul Huzn was named because it was a time of grief, not because the Prophet had a grudge against those months or the events that took place during those months. The hadith says that never say anything bad about any time because فَإِنَّ الدَّهْرَ هُوَ اللَّهُ. Dahr, the ages, the time, Rozagad, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing else between it. We in our culture, sometimes because of our limited horizon, and sometimes because of a fear of acknowledging the presence and the role of Allah in sustaining the universe, we speak of nature. We say nature does this. We say that evolution has created this. Nature has created this. This is something which we find within the laws of nature. But there are no laws of nature. There is no nature. There is nothing that exists within the physical world or within the biological world except that it was placed there and it is sustained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can speak of nature, but just remember that nature doesn't have an independent existence. All it is one dimension, one facet, one aspect of the creation and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can speak about eras and time, but remember that time does not have its own progression. It is the unfolding of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we perceive and we know of as time. Now, the Prophet has a dual teaching with regard to that estimation that you have about circumstances and about the reality of different things that you might observe in life. Generally, those of us who give importance to omens, give importance to circumstances that we might face, we have a dual nature. There are some things that we think are good luck, and there are other things that we consider to be bad luck. In Arabic, that is known as tafa'ul, if I think that something is good luck. If I wake up on the right side of the bed and things seem to be going my way. For some of us, we're very simple. If we're able to comb our hair on the first try, then we have a good hair day, we say this is a good start for the morning. If things are going our way. But then if we wake up and something breaks, we stub our toe on the leg of our bed, we drop a plate during breakfast, we try to start our car and we have a flat tire, our battery is dead, we left the lights on, something doesn't go our way, then we take that as a bad sign, and we think that the rest of our day is going to be bad luck as well. That is known in Arabic as tatayyur. Tatayyur means that you have a bad omen. In Surah Yasin, when we say طَائِرُكُمْ مَعَكُمْ, that refers to that tendency that people have, that they will see somebody, something will happen, and they'll say, this is bad luck. This is not going to end well. So there were two tendencies that existed in the culture of Arabia, and many of us, we have that tendency within ourselves as well. Some things we see of as being good luck, tafa'ul, and some things we see of as being bad luck, tatayyur. The Prophet did not deal with both of them equally. He said that if you think something is good luck, more power to you. It might just be a figment of your imagination. It might be something that is actually a sign of divine grace. But if you wish to feel optimistic because of a circumstance, you wake up, you open your curtains, it's a sunny day, and you think that is a good omen. Now, it might be a cloudy day and it might be better for you than when it's sunny and when it's good weather. But the Prophet said this is something which is halal for a Muslim. Because optimism by itself is something which is recommended and which is an attribute of a mu'min. And so if that optimism is helped because of circumstances that you face, then that is not a sin. But the opposite is something that is a sin in Islam. Tatayyur is a sin. So if I see a black cat, if it's Friday the 13th, if I accidentally walk under a ladder, if I break a mirror, whatever other things there are that people become worried about. Some of these superstitions are childish superstitions. But then there are other superstitions that you will find even educated people, even cultured people, even adults sometimes worry about. Whatever it might be, that is something which is not permitted in Islam. And the only reason that tafa'ul is permitted, that having a good omen is permitted, that also is because it has a psychological benefit for us. In reality, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who sends good tests and bad tests, happiness and sadness into our hearts and into our circumstances. And those good signs that we see, they are only, if anything, useful as being a way for us to remember the optimism that Allah wants us to have in all circumstances. In a very beautiful hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. He says that always remember that Musa alayhi salam left his family when he saw the fire. And his hope was that he will go and get some fire so that they can have a warm meal and some heat and some protection at night. He went to bring fire for his family. And he came back with miracles and with revelation as a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so always have more hope in the mystery and in those things that you know nothing about than you have even in those things that you are planning for. Which doesn't mean don't plan. Plan. Save for your future. Plan out your future. But then have more hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give me something, will bring me something that is entirely outside of my expectations, and always have that raja and that hope more present in your heart than you are hopeful about what you are doing for yourself. You are taking certain steps for yourself, and Allah is managing and sustaining your affairs. Your greater hope is in what Allah is doing compared to what you are doing. The words of the Imam are, Kun lima la tarju, arja minka lima tarju. Have more hope in those things that you have no knowledge of and no hope for than you have even in those things which you know about and which you are therefore able to have hope in. So the Prophet said that this is the reality of a believer's life. It is the principle of a believer's life. And if a good circumstance, a good luck is something that helps you in that path, then that is fine. But the opposite is not true. And this was so emphasized by the Prophet that there was sometimes a misunderstanding that came when the Prophet would give a teaching that seemed to contradict this teaching. I mentioned in a previous talk that there were some companions who were very quick to question the Prophet or very quick to jump to conclusions. That is not exclusive to any one generation. Every prophet had some companions who were very quick to jump to conclusions. Every prophet had some companions who were very humble and very receptive to new information. Every prophet had different levels of people, and the role of the Prophet was to try to bring them to a greater understanding. One of the trials of our Prophet, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is that he was dealing with probably a more diverse group of people than any other prophet in history. Imagine that the Prophet of Islam is dealing with the most educated and the most learned Christian priests and rabbis of the world at that time. Whether it be the Christians of Najran, the Jews of Yathrib, the Jews of Medina, or the other delegations that would come from elsewhere in the Middle East, that was the cradle and the center of both the Christian religion and the Jewish religion. And those who would come and debate with the Prophet and argue with the Prophet, many of them would be very stubborn and some of them would be receptive and accept Islam. They were not illiterate people. They were among the most learned people in their scripture and in their religious traditions of their time. Some of them were people who were able to teach literacy and learning and writing and also math and other sciences to the Muslims. If you look at Islamic history, then one of the areas of Islamic law that requires a very sophisticated understanding of math is the book of inheritance, al-Fara'id or al-Irth, to know the shares of inheritance. If you study Sunni law, then it is very complicated because they have percentages and reconciliations about the shares of inheritance that take a great deal of sophistication. The laws of inheritance within Ja'fari Shi'i fiqh are somewhat less complicated, somewhat less intricate, but it still takes quite a bit of sophistication. Among the companions of the Prophet, there was one person who was especially expert in dealing with inheritance according to the law and the principles of Ahl Sunnah. And his name was Zayd ibn Thabit, a young member of the Ansari community. He was a companion of the Prophet. He was one of the scribes of the Prophet. He wrote some of the correspondence and the letters of the Prophet. He was also in the employ of the first two caliphs. He was known as being an expert in inheritance, fractions, and dividing up estates. Very difficult task. And he was known for having studied and learned from the rabbis of Medina. In fact, he was fluent in Hebrew and in Arabic. Zayd ibn Thabit, he was one of the companions who would translate for the Prophet when the Prophet would receive correspondence in Hebrew. Because he was equally fluent and conversant in both languages, he had studied with both rabbis and Jewish scholars in Medina, gone to the Midrash, gone to the schools which they had, and also he was, of course, a Muslim and living with the Prophet and learning from the Prophet as well. So the Prophet was dealing with educated people from his society, from religious communities. He was dealing with Quraysh, and Quraysh were not just a small tribe. They were recognized even before Islam as the preeminent tribe in Hijaz and in fact in Arabia. They had trade relations and diplomatic relations with Yemen and with Syria and with Abyssinia. When the Muslims, under the leadership of the brother of Imam Ali, Ja'far al-Tayyar alayhi salam, made a migration to Abyssinia, then Quraysh was able to send a delegation and say that we have long-standing diplomatic ties with your kingdom, and therefore we request you to return our refugees to our care. Now, because of the purity of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and the verses of Quran about Isa alayhi salam and about Maryam salamullahi alayha that he was able to recite, and the way that he explained the message of Islam and the person of the Prophet, the king rejected that extradition request. But imagine who would have the courage to go to one of the most powerful emperors of his time and request extradition for somebody who has sought refuge with that emperor. So Quraysh had that worldly position that they thought they might be able to have that request answered. The Prophet was dealing with those rabbis. He was dealing with those priests. He was dealing with Quraysh. He was dealing with, at the same time, illiterate Bedouins who didn't know how to read, who didn't know how to write, who didn't know how to take care of basic hygiene. That diversity, religious, intellectual, educational, cultural, that diversity is something which we can say that probably no other prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to deal with in that way. And it was reflected in the companions of the Prophet. Some of them were at a very high rank. Certainly we can say some of them were better than the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is something which it is possible for a human to attain. And others of them, they were at the very bottom of that educational and cultural and human level of attainment. So one of the challenges the Prophet had was those know-it-alls. The Prophet once said in a hadith that if you are ever going to send a delegation to somebody, then send somebody who has a good name and somebody who has a pleasant face, who has a good demeanor and a pleasant looking face. So one of those companions stood up. Ya Rasulullah, alam tanhana anit tatayyur? Didn't you forbid us from thinking that something is bad luck? It was such a well-known teaching of the Prophet that you can never imagine, never say that something is bad luck. That when the Prophet said this, one of those companions stood up and said that, Ya Rasulullah, you told us that we can't consider anything to be bad luck. So how is it that you are now telling us that when you send a delegation to somebody, then choose somebody who has a good name and choose somebody who has a pleasant features and a pleasant looking face? The Prophet said, مَا تَطَيَّرْتُ وَإِنَّمَا اخْتَرْتُ. I haven't said that anything is bad luck, but I have done ikhtiyar, I have chosen. In other words, the Prophet is saying that there is an effect, there is a certain result that will happen when a person goes to somebody and they have a pleasing name, when they have a pleasing expression and a pleasing way of interacting with other people. If you have a right, a haqq that you need to get from somebody, then make sure that you are going to use those resources and be aware of how it is possible for you to get the best chance to receive that haqq or that hajat or that need that you might have. This is ikhtiyar. The Prophet never said, shoot yourself in the foot. If you're going for a job interview and you have two outfits, one of them looks professional and one of them is dirty, then wear the dirty one, wear the worn out one and say that, well, I don't believe in bad luck. That's not bad luck. That is shooting yourself in the foot. And maybe the Prophet was also giving a indirect message to his companions that it is important for you to think about what name you are going to give to your own children and your own family members. That will have an effect on their personality, on their identity. There are some names which you can choose, and studies have been done, all of you are familiar with those studies, that if you have two identical resumes, and you have one name, that person is more likely to get hired, another name, a person is less likely to get hired. But that is just a superficial economic dimension of the situation. Sometimes that name that gives you a better chance of getting hired is also a name that will water down your identity. And people will not be able to say, is this a Muslim or is that not a Muslim? You might have an economic benefit, but you will have a spiritual and a religious cost. If the name that I give to my daughter or the name that I give to my son doesn't strengthen their identity. Now, if I can combine all of those in one, societally beneficial, economically beneficial, religiously and spiritually beneficial, then that is great. But if I have to choose, then which is more important? Which is going to be of greater consequence and of greater benefit for the entirety of a person's life? That they can get a job faster, or that they can have a deeper connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So maybe the Prophet was also giving this message as well. But the reminder that we have from this hadith is that it is so important for us never to think that anything is bad luck. That this was something which the Prophet emphasized time and time again. Now I want to move forward in this discussion and look at one other important teaching that we have in Islam, and something which is also extremely influential in preserving our moderation. Take a look at those members of any cultural or religious community that are most at risk for extremism or for deviation. And that deviation or that extremism can be of any type. Sometimes the deviation or the extremism can take a violent turn. But we will be doing ourselves and our societies a disservice if we only focus on violent extremism. Deviation and extremism can take many different forms. Violence is only one of those forms, and in some cases it will be the last of those forms to actually show itself and become visible in society. But one thing that you will find is very common among people who become waswasi, meaning they have that constant doubt about their religious acts. They will wash themselves and then they will doubt, is my hand still najis or not? A splash of water will come on them, it might be drizzling outside, and they will think that they have become najis. They have to wash themselves, then they have to change their clothes, then they have to go and take a shower, then they have to wash themselves again. They have to repeat their prayers. They will not be able to eat something comfortably, or even accept an invitation at somebody's house. Whatever the case may be, this is one form of extremism. Another form of extremism is when people become very cynical, when they become very dismissive and condescending and rude towards other people or people with other perspectives. Sometimes this may lead to aggression and even criminal behavior. And this is not exclusive to any religion. It is not exclusive to any one society. But one factor that you will find that is very common is that these are generally people who are isolated socially and culturally from their families, from their peers, and from their societies. In our day, it is a person sitting in front of a computer screen and getting all of their stimulation and their news and their socialization online, without any real friends, without any real kind of socialization, without any real kind of sense of community and camaraderie. And Islam has given us a very, very strong message that in general you should not want to be alone. To be alone throughout a person's life, that is something that Islam has strongly discouraged. The philosophy of our daily prayers, Salatul Jama'ah, is that we pray them in congregation. Jama'ah is something that is mustahab for every one of our prayers. And historically and traditionally, it was customary for people not just to pray Maghrib and Isha, for example, in congregation when they had finished their worldly affairs, but they would make an effort to pray Fajr in congregation as well, Dhuhr in congregation, Asr in congregation, Maghrib and Isha. And in order to do that, sometimes you may shorten the prayer. You don't have to do all of the nawafil and all of those extra things. If you have a choice between doing Salatul Jama'ah and skipping some of the nawafil or some of the ta'qibat, and praying on your own and doing those ta'qibat, which is better for a person to do? To pray their daily prayers in Jama'at. What is the philosophy of that Jama'at? Now, most of us, with our lives, with our distances, with our work, school, and other obligations, we aren't going to be able to pray all 5 of those prayers in Jama'at every day. But as an ideal, it should be still present within our minds and within our thoughts. When we are able to do so, we should make an effort to do so. It is better to pray those prayers in Jama'at, and the reason for that is that you see each other's faces. And after the prayer, you shake hands and you renew personal connections. Now, maybe in the future we will have somebody issue a fatwa that you can join a Jama'at online if you have a channel, but that is not something which Islam has ever allowed. And in fact, in the teaching of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam, there is a requirement that you shouldn't even have a physical distance from the Jama'at. Those of you who may have gone for Hajj or for Umrah, you will have noticed that sometimes in the Jama'at that is conducted in Mecca and in Medina, there is a distance that exists between the Imam and the Ma'mumin, the followers, or between one row of followers and another. So the Imam might be standing here, and the followers might be standing 20 yards, 30 yards across a river, across a road somewhere else. This was a matter of difference of opinion among the fuqaha in Islamic history. Different Imams, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and other scholars, they had different opinions about what is the distance that you can have in Jama'at. The teaching of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam is that the Jama'at is intended to be one prayer. Don't think of it as being 500 people or 200 people or even 2 people doing an individual prayer at the same time. Think of it as one prayer. And therefore there cannot be as much distance as a person would not normally be able to cover within one step. In common custom, we cannot be separated from one another physically. Forget following in from a recording on TV or on radio. Even if we are in the same room, but you are standing over there and I am standing over here, it's not a Jama'at. It has to be connected. There has to be a connection, a proximity and a closeness for it to be a Jama'ah. So the philosophy of that teaching in Islam is that we should come together. Now this point needs to be emphasized because in this society we live in a very individual society. Islamically, if we look at the verses of the Quran, we are told that we should have a certain familiarity and a certain closeness with our relatives in particular, brothers, sisters, parents, children, and to the extent that they should feel very comfortable entering into our homes, and we should feel very comfortable going to their homes, and even eating from their food without feeling the need to ask permission. Is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I use this? Is it okay if I utilize this property of yours, or can I eat this food that I find in your fridge? In Islam, we have that teaching that with our close friends, with our close family, we should be able to have very little or almost no formalities. But that is not the way that this society operates. If I find out that somebody is sick, and I say it is sunnah for me to go and do iyadah, and it is sunnah. It was the practice of the Prophet, it was the practice of our imams. But if I go and I do iyadah, then it won't be far-fetched if somebody comes and says, why didn't you call first? Why didn't you give me enough time to prepare? Sometimes people might say that, well, I'd rather suffer alone. I wouldn't want to have people come and then I have to host and then I have to worry about whether the room is clean and the house is ready. And we have that culture and that tendency that has come where the pleasure of human company, unplanned human company, it almost has lost its place within our society and within our culture. It's not that any one individual is at fault. Life, occupations, responsibilities, families, even the way that houses are built today, they are built in such a way that it doesn't always facilitate having a room that is dedicated for hosting and for having guests over. So it is an entire society, an entire structure that we are dealing with. But recognizing that conflict with our Islamic values, each and every one of us has a responsibility for trying to find ways where we can go against the general tendency of this culture and this society that tends to isolate people within our own homes, even inside the home, within our own bedrooms. The trend in architecture over the last few generations is that now people don't even share a bathroom with the remaining people in the house. That might have been at one time the only point of joint contact, the bathroom, the fridge, the television. But now everyone has a wireless connection, they can find it in their own bedroom, so they have a suite, and even within the home, you are not going to see other people. As Muslims, we have to make efforts within our families to get together for mealtime, for prayer time, for salat and for other times. And then also within our extended families and within our communities, there is a hadith of the Prophet that deals with traveling. The Prophet says that when you want to travel somewhere, then he says, al-rafiq thumma as-safar. If you want to plan for a journey, then don't first make the plan where you want to go, where you want to stay, how you want to plan that journey. First find out who you are going to travel with. Don't worry about the hotel. If you have pleasant company and good company, then that journey will be a relaxing and it will be a beneficial and it will be a spiritual experience for you, even if you have to sleep in the car, even if you have to sleep under the stars. But if you haven't made those arrangements, then you might find material comfort, but your soul will not benefit from that journey. Al-Rafiq thumma safar. First have a hamsafar, have a companion that is worthy of the journey, and then embark on a journey. And there are many times in Islam when we have a similar teaching. The hadith in Sunan al-Nabi, and this hadith is found in both Sunni and in Shi'i sources. It says, كَانَ أَحَبَّ الطَّعَامِ إِلَى النَّبِي الْقَبَض. the very favorite food of the Prophet. Now we might think that the favorite food of the Prophet is going to be a certain type of food. If you ask me or you, what is your favorite food, then we'll tell the dish. We'll tell the type of preparation. We'll tell the restaurant. What was the favorite ta'am of the Prophet? Al-Qadab. And what is al-Qadab? It's not a particular type of food, but it is a meal in which there are many hands that are partaking of the meal. In other words, for the Prophet, it doesn't matter what he was eating. But if he had company, if he had pleasant company, then the Prophet would enjoy the meal. Some of you may have heard one of the ahadith in praise of Imam Ali alayhi salam, which is known as Hadith al-Tayr al-Mashwi. The hadith of the roasted bird. Now, this was a very fancy meal that was prepared by the Arabs at that time when they wanted to honor somebody, a guest, or a very honorable person. Then they would prepare a roasted meal of bird, some type of a very fancy meal. It is said that a lady from the Ansar gifted to the Prophet such a meal, a very fancy meal. And the Prophet prayed to Allah that, "Oh Allah, send for me the most beloved of your creation in your eyes, so that he can share in this meal with me." Normally, if something is really tempting for us, if it's the pie that you really like, if it's a food that you really like, then it's difficult to wait for somebody else. At least you figure that, let me have a morsel and then another morsel, and by the time your companions come, half of it is gone or all of it is gone. You tell them that next time, inshallah, we'll share the meal together. But that wonderful meal came to the Prophet. He said, "Allahumma ab'ath ilayya ahabba al-khalqi ilayk." Send to me ahabbul khalqi ilayk, your most beloved creation, so that we can eat this meal together. At that time, there was a young member of Ansar, Anas ibn Malik, who was the assistant or the servant of the Prophet. So he was standing by the door, and he heard a knock at the door. He also had heard this dua of the Prophet. And he was an Ansari, and like the tribal and family loyalty that many of us also have, he said, inshallah, this is going to be a member of the Ansar. So he heard a knock on the door, and at the door it was Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Anas ibn Malik was a young boy at that time. He can be excused that kind of loyalty and that kind of tribal affection. And in reality, his response was a reason for this hadith to become memorable and narrated by so many different sources in the Fada'il and the Manaqib of Imam Ali alayhi salam. When he opened the door, he saw it was Imam Ali. He said, "Can you come back later? The Prophet's busy right now." So Imam Ali left. And then after a little while, he came back and he knocked at the door. And he did this 3 times. The 3rd time, the Prophet heard the knock at the door. And he called Anas. He said that, "Anas, who's at the door?" He said that it is Ali ibn Abi Talib. The Prophet said, "Invite him in." When Imam Ali came to the Prophet, he saw him sitting there with that fancy, very pleasant meal. By that time, probably it had already gotten cold. The Prophet said, "Ya Ali, what kept you? I have been praying to Allah to bring you, and I have been waiting for you for a considerable time. Ya Ali, what delayed you?" And Imam Ali said, "Ya Rasulullah, I came so many times, but I was told that you were busy." The Prophet said that, "Come now and share this meal with me." So, كَانَ أَحَبُّ الطَّعَامِ إِلَى النَّبِي الْقَدَرِ. The Prophet did not used to eat alone, regardless of the quantity of the meal, regardless of the desirability of the meal. The pleasure that the Prophet would get is from the company. Eating alone is something which is disliked, which is abhorrent to a Muslim, and it was not the sunnah of the Prophet. And then there is a hadith of our 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. says, البائت في البيت وحده شيطان والإثنان أمة والثلاثة أنس. That if a person is alone in a house at night, that person is a shaitan. البائت في البيت وحده شيطان. A person who spends the night alone in a house is a shaitan. Meaning that a person who is going to be alone is going to be subject to the whisperings and the temptations of shaitan. And shaitan does not only come and tell you to commit a sin. I might be alone in a home and I can reject shaitan when he comes and tries to tell me to commit a certain sin. I might not say, I might not do, I might not watch, I might not listen to anything that is haram. But that is not the only door that shaitan uses to come and to try to weaken me. Sometimes it might be by coming and making me arrogant. Sometimes it might be by reducing and damaging my emotional state. Sometimes it might be by harming me in another way. When a believer is emotionally weak or vulnerable or depressed or down, then that person is not able to be of benefit to themselves or of benefit to other people in society. Shaitan has attacked that person and damaged that person and damaged their usefulness to others and to their family and to their society, even if they haven't committed a sin. So our sixth Imam says that make an effort. Now sometimes, exceptionally, you have no other choice. But if I know that I am going to be alone for an extended period of time, my family is leaving, I'm not going to be together, then make an effort to try to invite somebody over, find human company. As an exception, I might not have a choice at all times. But I should make an effort that if I am going to be alone, to have company over. It says that al-ba'itu fil bayti wahdahu shaitan. If you are alone at home, then you are shaitan. Or you will be subject to the temptations and the whisperings of shaitan. وَالْإِثْنَانُ أُمَّةٌ. But if you have two, then you are a group. Then you are a community. Two is acceptable. وَالثَّلَاثَ أُنْس. If you have three people, now you have uns. Now you have a good company. That is an ideal. So when it comes to spending the night, when it comes to our meals, when it comes to traveling, in all cases Islam has said that you should make an effort to have the company of your fellow believers, and good company. That is a separate teaching, that what kind of company should you be seeking. But the first point is that Islam wants us to try to value company. It's even makruh to leave a mayyit alone. If a person dies, that janazah should not be left alone. It should be honored and respected. And there should be a believer that will keep the company of the janazah. In Islam, even a janazah is to be given that respect and that veneration, that if a person dies, then don't just abandon the janazah and say that I'm spooked and I'm scared to go into that room. No, keep it company. Stand by that janazah, make dua, pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now if this is a believer, a member of the community, then the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt and the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be coming and going, and the angels of rahmah and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be coming. There's nothing for me or you to be scared or to be spooked about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows mercy to His servants, to the mu'mineen and to the believers, and that is part of our respect and our veneration for our fellow believers. So to summarize, this is something which is an important part of our Islamic teaching, and one of the safeguards against deviation, one of the safeguards against arrogance, one of the safeguards against extremism, and one of the ways to maintain our moderation, to be and to value and to have the company of our fellow believers. So we have to work in order to create that. It might not always be very easy. We can organize frequent community get-togethers. Doesn't have to be that you only come together for a majlis or you come together for a milad. To have a gathering just where you recite poetry, where you come together just to recite qasida in praise of the Prophet or of Ahlul Bayt, where you come together just to share a meal. If homes are inconvenient, then in the center, without any other kind of worship or speech or lecture, that also is something which will bring people together. So at all ages, for our children, that is a need. For our young members of the community, that is a need. For those of us who are middle-aged and we have so many things going on, we might not always realize it and we might not always miss it, but it is a need. And especially for the elder members of our community, that is a very important need, and we have to make sure that we are making an effort to fulfill that need. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And maybe that is one reason why Imam Hasan alayhi salatu wassalam also brought Sallu ala Muhammad brought his family with him in the journey of Karbala. Yes, it was because each member of that caravan of the Imam had a role to play and had a jihad and a struggle to engage in. But it was also about the journey itself. The Imam has said that it was the company of his daughter Sakina, his wife Rabah, his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, his other relatives and the sons of Aqil, and his companions that made that journey, that made that struggle able to be born and able to be appreciated. It was not an easy journey, but the company which the Imam had, those companions that Allah had chosen for the Imam, they were what made it possible for the Imam to embark on that journey and perform the struggle and the service which he did. And each of those companions were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is our firm belief. Some of them, they had come from Medina. There were some who joined the Prophet's grandson in Mecca. There were others who joined the Prophet's grandson on the way to Iraq. But then there were some who almost missed that caravan. And yet something in their piety, something in their adab or in their sincerity brought them and joined them with Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam. امام کے جتنے صحابہ تھے، امام کے ساتھ جتنے شہید تھے کربلا میں، سب کو اللہ سبحانہ و تعالی نے امام کی صحبت اور معیت کے لیے چنا تھا. ان میں سے کچھ تھے جو مدینے سے امام کے ساتھ چلے تھے، کچھ تھے جو راستے میں امام کے ساتھ ملحق ہوئے تھے، اور پھر ایک ایسا شہید جو آخر تک دشمن فوج کا سپاہی تھا. جب امام کی حر سے ملاقات ہوئی تو ایک عجیب کیفیت تھی. کوفے سے 2000 سپاہیوں کو لے کے، اور حر امیر لشکر تھا، وہ اپنے سپاہیوں کو لے کے امام کی طرف بڑھ رہے تھے. راستہ کھو گئے تھے، پانی ختم ہو چکا تھا، اب موت کی کیفیت ہو گئی تھی. اور جب امام نے اس دشمن فوج کو دیکھا تو اصحاب نے کہا کہ اے فرزند رسول، اگر ہم ان سے ابھی جنگ کر لیں تو یہ ہمیں نہیں روک سکتے. امام نے کہا آپ ان کی پیاس کو نہیں دیکھ رہے؟ آپ دیکھ لے رہے کہ پیاس کی وجہ سے ان کی کیا کیفیت ہوئی ہے؟ ان کے جانوروں کو نہیں دیکھ رہے کہ ان کے گھوڑے بھی تشنا ہیں؟ امام نے حکم دیا کہ سب سے پہلے کوئی مذاکرہ نہ ہو، کوئی شرط نہ ہو، سب کو پانی دیا جائے. ایک سپاہی تھا اس حر کی فوج میں، وہ کہتا ہے کہ میں سب سے آخر میں تھا. 2000 فوجی اور امام کتنوں کے لیے پانی لائے ہوں گے؟ امام کے ساتھ تو 100 سے بھی کم افراد تھے. کہتا ہے کہ مجھے خوف تھا کہ مجھ تک پانی نہیں پہنچ سکے گا، لیکن جب میری نوبت آئی تو میں نے دیکھا کہ میرے سامنے خود فرزند رسول کھڑے ہیں، ہاتھ میں مشکیزہ لیے ہیں، میرے کاندھوں پہ ہاتھ ڈالا اور اپنے ہاتھوں سے مجھے پانی پلایا. اور جب میں پانی پی چکا تو پھر میرے گھوڑے کو بھی پانی پلایا. یہ امام کی سیرت تھی. اور پھر امام نے حر کے ساتھ مذاکرہ کیا. حر نے کہا کہ مجھے حکم دیا گیا ہے کہ آپ کو کوفہ جانے سے روکوں. امام نے ایک ایسا جملہ ارشاد فرمایا جو ظاہر میں بڑا سخت جملہ ہے، لیکن شاید اسی جملے نے حر کے وجدان کو، حر کے ضمیر کو ہلا کے رکھ دیا. امام نے کہا کہ یا حر ثقلتک امک یا حر انت تمنعنی، اے حر تیری ماں تیری اعضاء میں بیٹھے، کیا تو میرا راستہ روکے گا؟ اب حر ایک دم پریشان ہوتا ہے کہ کیا جواب دے. عرض کیا کہ اے فرزند رسول، اگر عرب میں کوئی اور شخص مجھ سے یہ جملہ کہتا تو میں بھی جواب میں اس کی ماں کا تذکرہ کرتا، لیکن میں کیا کروں کہ آپ کی والدہ تو سیدہ کونین ہیں، فاطمہ الزہرا ہیں. میں آپ کے لیے اور آپ کی ماں کے لیے اور آپ کے تمام خاندان کے لیے دعا کے سوا کچھ نہیں کہہ سکتا. امام نے حر کا بھی احترام رکھا. حر سے کہا کہ تم اپنے صحابیوں کے ساتھ نماز پڑھو، میں اپنے صحابیوں کے ساتھ نماز پڑھتا ہوں. حر نے کہا اے فرزند رسول، جب تک ہم ساتھ ہیں ہم آپ کے پیچھے نماز پڑھیں گے. اور چلتے گئے. جب کربلا پہنچے تو حر اپنی فوج میں اور امام اپنے صحابہ کے درمیان. لیکن اس تمام مدت میں حر دونوں طرف کے حالات کو دیکھ رہے تھے، ملاحظہ کر رہے تھے. جیسے ہی دشمن فوجوں میں اضافہ ہوا، 2000 سے 4000 ہوئے، 4000 سے 6000 ہوئے، 6000 سے 10,000 ہوئے، 10,000 سے 30,000 ہوئے، تو حر کو ابھی تک یہ اطمینان نہیں تھا کہ کسی مسلمان کی جرأت ہوگی کہ فرزند رسول اور آل محمد و آل مصطفیٰ سے جنگ کرے. اب شب عاشور حر کی بڑی عجیب کیفیت تھی. کبھی اس طرف دیکھتے ہیں تو تلاوت قرآن کی آواز آ رہی ہے، ذکر الہی کی آواز آ رہی ہے، کوئی سجدے میں ہے، کوئی رکوع میں ہے، کوئی قرآن کی تلاوت کر رہا ہے، کوئی نماز پڑھ رہا ہے، کوئی جنگ کی تیاری کر رہا ہے. اور ادھر ابن سعد کی فوج کو دیکھتا ہے تو دیکھتا ہے کہ جوا ہے، شراب ہے، ہر فاسق کسی گناہ میں مبتلا ہے. صبح عاشورہ جب ہوتی ہے تو حر ابن سعد کے پاس پہنچتے ہیں. کہتے ہیں کہ یا ابن سعد، کیا واقعی فرزند رسول سے جنگ کا ارادہ رکھتے ہو؟ تو عمر ابن سعد نے جواب دیا کہ اے حر، ایسی جنگ ہوگی جس کا سب سے آسان مرحلہ یہ ہوگا کہ ہاتھ کٹیں گے، سر بدن سے جدا ہوں گے. اب حر لرزہ بر اندام ہوا، بدن کانپنے لگا، اپنے خیمے کی طرف واپس جاتا ہے. اور حر کا ایک ساتھی تھا، وہ کہتا ہے کہ میں حر کی کیفیت کو دیکھ رہا تھا اور مجھے تعجب ہوا کہ ایسا بہادر، ایسا دلیر اب کس طرح سے کانپ رہا ہے. حر سے کہتا ہے کہ اے حر، اگر اس سے پہلے مجھ سے کبھی پوچھا جاتا کہ کوفہ کا سب سے شجاع اور سب سے دلیر آدمی کون ہے تو میں بے جھجک آپ کا نام لیتا. لیکن اب میں یہ کیا کیفیت دیکھ رہا ہوں، ہمارے پاس 30,000 فوجی ہیں اور ادھر تو صرف 70 فوجی ہیں، اور ان میں سے کچھ 90 سال کے بوڑھے ہیں اور کچھ نابالغ بچے ہیں. یہ کیا خوف ہے، یہ کیا پریشانی ہے، یہ کیا اضطراب ہے؟ تو حر نے کہا میں دیکھ رہا ہوں کہ میں جنت و جہنم کے بیچ میں کھڑا ہوں، اور اللہ نے حر کو جہنم کے لیے پیدا نہیں کیا. یہ کہہ کے آہستہ آہستہ حر اب اس طرف سے اس طرف بڑھنے لگے. روایتوں میں ملتا ہے کہ حر کے بیٹے نے اپنے باپ کو دیکھا، کہا کہ بابا کہاں جا رہے ہیں؟ کہا کہ میں فرزند رسول سے ملاق ہونے جا رہا ہوں. بیٹا بھی حر کے ساتھ مل گیا. کچھ روایتوں میں ملتا ہے کہ حر کے بھائی اور حر کے غلام بھی साथ मिल गए और ये एक मुख्तसर सा काफिला यजीदी फौज से हुसैनी फौज की तरफ आगे बढ़ा। इमाम के असहाब ने दूर से देखा कि कुछ अफराद आ रहे हैं। पहले खौफ हुआ कि शायद कोई हमला करने आया है, फिर जब गौर से देखा तो वही हुर। पहले तो घोड़े को दौड़ाया, लेकिन जैसे ही हुर करीब आने लगे तो शर्मिंदगी बढ़ी, सर झुकने लगा। कुछ बयान करते हैं कि एक मरहला आया कि हुर ने अपने गुलाम से कहा कि मेरे हाथों को बांध लो, मैं 10 बस्ता इमाम की खिदमत में हाजिर हूँ। इमाम ने जब देखा कि हुर तशरीफ ला रहे हैं तो अपने असहाब से कहा कि जाइए इस्तकबाल के लिए जाइए, मेरी फौज आ रही है। हुर इमाम की खिदमत में हाजिर हुए, अपने घोड़े से उतरे, अपने सर को जमीन पर रखा, कहा कि ऐ फर्जंद रसूल, मैं ही हूं कि जिसने आपके रास्ते को रोका, मैं ही हूं कि जिसने आपको कूफा जाने से रोका, मैं ही हूं कि जिसकी वजह से आले रसूल में खौफ तारी है, मैं हूं जिन्होंने आपके खेमों को पानी से दूर किया। और फिर अपने तमाम गुनाहों का एतराफ करके हुर अर्ज करते हैं कि यब्न रसूलिल्लाह हल्ली मिन तौबा, ऐ फर्जंद रसूल, क्या मुझ जैसे की तौबा कबूल हो सकती है? इमाम ने कहा कि हुर खड़े हो जाओ, अब आप गुनहगार नहीं, अब आप हुसैन के मेहमान हैं। और हुसैन को ये अफसोस है कि अपने मेहमान की ज़ियाफत के लिए, मेहमान नवाजी के लिए कुछ असास नहीं है। और हुसैन को माफ कर कि हुसैन के पास आपकी मेहमान नवाजी के लिए कुछ नहीं है। हुर ने कहा कि मौला इजाजत दीजिए, मैं मुखद्दरात इस्मत से भी माजरत कर लूं। इमाम ने इजाजत दी। हुर जनाब ज़ैनब के खेमे के बाहर जाके बैठ गए, कहा कि ऐ सैयदा, ये वो गुनहगार है कि जिसने आपके दिलों में खौफ बिठाया, ये वो गुनहगार है कि जिसने आपको यहाँ पे आने पे मजबूर किया, मेरी खता माफ कर दे। और खेमे से एक आवाज बुलंद हुई, वाह मुहम्मदा वाह हुसैना। रिवायत में मिलता है कि हुर ने अपने सर पे खाक उठा के डालना शुरू किया और जानों के बल वापस इमाम की खिदमत में हाजिर होते हैं। कहते हैं कि मौला, मैं पहला शख्स था कि जो दुश्मन फौज के उन्वान से आपके सामने खड़ा हुआ, मैं पहला शहीद होना चाहता हूँ। इमाम ने सर झुका दिया, लेकिन जब हुर का इसरार देखा, फरमाया बिस्मिल्लाह। हुर जंग के लिए तैयार होते हैं। अब ये बहादुर हुर भूखा नहीं है, प्यासा नहीं है, जंग के लिए आगे बढ़ता है, लेकिन अचानक रुक जाता है। अपने बेटे को बुलाता है। हुर के बेटे का नाम अली था। अपने बेटे को बुला के कहता है कि ऐ फर्जंद, मैं चाहता हूं कि आपकी जंग को देखो। पता नहीं किस बात ने हुर के इरादे को बदला। शायद हुर की निगाह अली अकबर पे पड़ी होगी और उस लम्हे का तस्वुर किया होगा कि जब इमाम अपने हाथों से अली अकबर को जंग के लिए तैयार कर लो। हुर ने अपने बेटे को मैदान जंग की तरफ भेजा। बहादुरी से अली इब्न हुर ने जंग की और जब वो अपने घोड़े से गिरने लगे तो बाबा को पुकारा, अस्सलाम अलैका या बता। अब हुर ने अपने घोड़े को दौड़ाया, अपने बेटे के बारी पे पहुंचा, लेकिन देखा कि पहले हुसैन वहां पे मौजूद है और अली इब्न हुर के हाथ सर को अपने गोद में लिए हुए हैं। हुर ने हाथ बढ़ाना चाहा, अपने बेटे की लाश को उठाना चाहा। इमाम ने फौरन अपना हाथ बढ़ाया, कहा कि हुर, ऐसा भी कहीं होता है कि बूढ़ा बाप अपने बेटे को लाश को खुद उठाए? इस्लाम में मकरूह है। इमाम ने उनके बेटे की लाश को उठाया, खेमे की तरफ वापस आए और फिर हुर ने दोबारा इमाम से इजाजत ली। جنگ کے لیے آگے بڑھتے ہیں، دلیری کے ساتھ، بہادری کے ساتھ ہر جنگ کرتے ہیں، اور جب وہ اپنے گھوڑے سے گرتے ہیں تو امام سے آخری سلام عرض کرتے ہیں، مولا غلام کا سلام قبول ہو۔ امام حر کے پاس پہنچتے ہیں، اپنے حر کے شہید کے سر کو اپنی گود میں لیتے ہیں اور اپنے ہاتھوں سے زخموں کا خون صاف کرنے لگتے ہیں۔ اور پھر امام نے ایک عجیب فعل انجام دیا۔ جتنے بھی شہید تھے کربلا کے، سب کے بدنوں سے خون جاری تھا، سب زخمی تھے، لیکن ایک شہید ہے کہ جس کی وجہ سے امام نے اپنی جیب سے رومال نکالا اور ماتھے پہ وہ رومال باندھا تاکہ خون جاری نہ ہو، زخموں سے خون جاری نہ ہو۔ یہ ایک رومال تھا جو امام نے اپنے جیب سے نکالا اور حر کے ماتھے پہ باندھا۔ شاید امام حر کو پیغام دینا چاہ رہے تھے کہ اے حر، تم میری ماں سے شرمندہ تھے، اب تمہیں جناب سیدہ سے کوئی شرمندگی نہیں ہوگی۔ روز محشر جناب سیدہ اس رومال کو پہچان لیں گی۔ انا للہ و انا الیہ راجعون۔ وسیعلم الذین ظلموا ای منقلب ینقلبون۔ خاتم حسن